Okay, so today we'll be talking about Essential 8 and some of our experiences in auditing Essential 8 as members of the GRC team. And we see things all the time. There's a common theme, especially with IT MSPs, where they've been implementing the Essential 8 standards. Let's talk something about that, some of the issues, some of the key glaring things we see all the time.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the time, the common trends where IT MSPs often implement E8 is that they have this conflict between convenience and security. So MSPs are going to want to default towards convenience unless you tell them, hey, maybe we should look at some security controls. It makes their life easy. So their key objective is they want to make things work for the client. So what we've seen is for one of the strategies in the E8, there's MFA, they'll want to exclude themselves out of MFA for their admin account, so that way they can go in and make things work, but that goes against the E8.
Yeah, so it's all about, they don't want to have the phone call saying, I can't log into my email. They want to be able to jump in quickly without MFA, so it sort of defeats the purpose, especially where you've got MFA already in place at the organization. The MSPs can often hold all the keys to the kingdom, and then
it's not just MFA, so pretty much every policy. So if they've got overseas staff, then they're going to exclude themselves from Australia-only login policies.
The whole number of examples like that. We'll go into some more of those as well, but MFA is a big one for convenience. It's a pain for people to implement sometimes and have to use, so avoiding that for the MSP itself is not quite fair. Defeats the purpose of the requirement. Okay, so the next one we can talk around is some of the rights management as well with shared admins. We see that quite a lot. Just to make it easier, you have to use less licenses, things like that. Having a shared admin account amongst MSP staff is a problem. You don't have accountability, you don't know who's doing what. You may have people from overseas accessing it that you weren't aware of that aren't on your account. That's something we've seen in our assessments previously where access controls implemented apart from that, but that apart from bit is a big problem.
And that shared admin account usually has order permissions. So
keys to the kingdom for sure. That's a good one.
That is going to have a lot of problems around logging. If you've got this one big account with order permissions, you're not going to know who's using it to do what.
Yeah, exactly. And accountability and non-repudiation is a big thing in security. You want to know who's doing what and how they did it, when they did it. Without that information, it's a big problem.
And that holds a lot of maturity back from ML2 in the E8.
Yep, for sure. So continuing on with the access control part, there's also an impression as well with IT MSPs going back to the making life easy and their core objective being making things work, essentially is their core job, to make sure IT works in the organization they're working for. Not wanting to rock the boat is problematic as well. I know we often have tough conversations with clients around, hey, this is going to be a change in business process to put this access control in, but it's really what is needed. It's what aligned with the risk level that you have for certain files, certain systems. IT MSPs will often not want to rock the boat because it's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, they'll default to making things work, as you said.
Yep.
And, they'll generally do what you tell them to do. So if you give the security requirements up front, then not rocking the boat means doing it.
Yeah.
But if you don't give the security requirements, then they're not going to.
Having it clearly defined, which often most organizations won't know necessarily what they need to do. It's hard to define it in a contract. And IT MSPs are known for following their contract to the letter. They'll do exactly what's in there. But if you're not able to step by step say, this is exactly what we want, and this is exactly how we want you to implement it, you're leaving a lot of the lifting on the MSP side to figure out what that is. And they're not up to date with best practices necessarily. They don't have experience in implementing Essential 8 controls, Essential 8 or other security frameworks for that matter as well. But Essential 8 is sort of a big technical one that requires a lot of understanding and experience to implement effectively. Maybe that's something we'll talk about as well, is sort of what we've seen in assessments where organizations have had an IT MSP implement something, but then where there's gaps and they don't know the little tips and secrets that you need to know to implement it successfully, and some of the workarounds. I mean, we see those in assessments all the time.
Yeah, so I think a good example is backups. They'll do backups and they'll do all the retention policies and all the daily, weekly, monthly retention that you need, but they're not going to necessarily test it unless you ask them to test it.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's a pretty common gap in
Yeah,
the regular
all the
backups.
time. Yeah, backups not being tested effectively. When the crunch time comes, they don't necessarily going to be able to trust it. Yeah, so going back to one of the key themes from the beginning that we're talking about is that conflict between convenience and security. Then IT's main job is to make sure things work, that people can access their email, can log in, that the network's functioning. Um, that really conflicts with needing to have a specific security control in place that may be difficult to implement. So not having that experience and training and keeping up with the best practices. Security is changing day to day. There's new things put out. Essential 8 is updated pretty regularly. That not keeping up on top of that means that you're leaving doors open. And then when we come do an assessment, and we see it all the time, that there's just gaps. There's nearly always gaps when it's not been a security company implementing it that doesn't have that understanding.
It's not their job to keep on top of best practices. Their job
Yep.
is, hey, can you implement restrict admin privileges against E8 for us? And what an MSP is going to do is they're going to hop onto the internet, they're going to Google how to implement
Yep.
restrict admin privileges. And what often comes up is not the ACSE guidance, it's going to be some other company giving guidance on how to implement the controls for an older version of the E8. So
Yeah, and at a specific organization sometimes too, not understanding the context and the risk that's involved. Like the way you apply controls, you need a security mind and the risk assessment sort of approach to understand, okay, this is where this control is appropriate, this is where maybe it's not needed, or you can change controls in certain areas, and where you can focus. That's often lost, and that's why it's a roadblock to IT MSPs doing it effectively, is that if they try and throw a specific control, restrict admin privilege, for example, or take any of the E8 controls and they try and implement it across the board in one way, usually won't work because organizations aren't flat. They don't have one system. They have multiple systems. It's going to be difficult. Sometimes they run into something that's too difficult and then it doesn't get done. And that's where you've sort of got the door open. If you can't implement MFA on a certain platform, how do you work around that? We know from experience at Security Centric, the engineering team, it can be difficult sometimes to figure out how to get it to work, even when you've got experience and you've done it a lot of times. You still have to put a lot of effort to do it, which IT MSPs aren't necessarily going to do that because it's too hard.
yeah, compensating controls.
Yeah,
That's not something
compensating
you can
controls
work
come in. Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, I mean, we sort of covered a lot of the key issues using IT MSPs to implement a technical standard like Essential 8. We always think that you need a security company to do security things. They're different jobs. You don't want IT necessarily being responsible for security. They're separate domains for a reason.
I think a war story that I have is some projects we can go in and ask the IT MSP what they've actually implemented, and they come back with a set of requirements that is not even E8. They're not even E8 requirements. They're just
What they're used to doing.
what they're used to doing,
Yep.
but also at one point we had a MSP come on with a AI generated list of requirements of what the
Yeah,
EA is,
that's-
and of course the AI is wrong.
Yep.
And they've went and done what they think is EA, but it's not even the right requirements.
Yeah.